James Bennett stood at the entrance of his upscale restaurant, the soft hum of laughter and clinking glasses creating a symphony of success that enveloped him. The dimmed lighting cast an alluring glow on the polished mahogany tables, each adorned with elegant centerpieces that echoed the sophistication of his culinary empire. Yet, despite the bustling patrons savoring his meticulously crafted dishes, a gnawing emptiness lingered in his chest, an unsettling void that no amount of wealth could fill. He watched as servers glided gracefully between tables, their trays filled with culinary masterpieces, each plate a testament to his relentless pursuit of excellence. James was a billionaire, a name synonymous with fine dining in the city, but every accolade felt hollow, every cheer muted by a shadow of something lost. His thoughts drifted like autumn leaves, swirling around memories of a love that had slipped through his fingers, a love that had vanished without a trace 25 years ago. As he absently surveyed the street outside, his gaze landed on a figure who seemed out of place in the elegance of his world. A woman, weathered by life and clad in tattered clothing, stood on the sidewalk. Beside her, a child clutched her hand, wide-eyed and vulnerable. The woman, Sarah, had a haunted look. Her face told a story of hardship and resilience, the kind that James had only seen in fleeting glimpses on his charity outings. Something about her struck a chord deep within him, an echo of familiarity that tugged at his heartstrings. Without a second thought, James reached into his pocket, pulling out a crisp $1,000 bill. He approached the woman, a mix of curiosity and compassion coursing through him. "Excuse me," he said, his voice steady yet gentle. "I'd like you to have this." Sarah looked up, surprise flickering in her eyes. I can't accept this," she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. "Please," James insisted, pressing the bill into her palm. "It's not charity. Consider it a gesture of goodwill. You and your daughter deserve better." The child, Emma, glanced up at her mother with innocent curiosity, her small fingers gripping Sarah's hand tighter. "Mommy, who is he?" she asked, her voice laced with the innocence of youth. James smiled softly, hoping to ease the tension. "Just someone who wants to help." After a moment of hesitation, Sarah finally nodded, gratitude replacing the wariness in her eyes. "Thank you," she murmured, her voice thick with emotion. "You don't know how much this means to us." James stood for a moment longer, captivated by the bond between mother and daughter. As he turned to re-enter the restaurant, a fleeting thought crossed his mind, a whisper of familiarity that he couldn't quite place. He shook it off, attributing it to the tiredness that came with managing such a demanding business. Later that night, as the last patrons filtered out and the restaurant fell into a serene silence, James found himself lost in thought. He sat at the bar, nursing a glass of scotch, the amber liquid swirling like the memories that haunted him. He couldn't shake the image of Sarah and Emma from his mind. The way the child had looked up at him, a mixture of wonder and uncertainty, stirred something deep within him. His thoughts drifted to Elizabeth, the love of his life, who had vanished without a trace. It had been 25 years since he had last seen her, and yet the ache of her absence was as raw as ever. He had searched for her tirelessly in the years that followed her disappearance, but every lead had turned cold, every hope extinguished. The guilt of not being able to protect her weighed heavily on his shoulders, a burden he carried alone. With a sigh, James set his glass down and decided to visit Elizabeth's grave. The cemetery was not far from his restaurant, and it had become a ritual of sorts, a way for him to connect with the past that had shaped his present. As he walked through the moonlit pathways, the cool night air wrapped around him, carrying the scent of damp earth and blooming flowers. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if the weight of his unresolved emotions was pulling him down. He finally arrived at the grave, marked by a simple stone bearing Elizabeth's name. Kneeling before it, he placed a bouquet of fresh lilies, her favorite, on the ground. "I'm sorry, Liz," he whispered, his voice cracking under the weight of his sorrow. "I've tried to find you. I've never stopped looking." As he spoke, memories flooded back, her laughter, the warmth of her embrace, the dreams they had shared. But alongside the warmth was the chill of guilt. What had happened to her? Why hadn't he been able to protect her? The questions haunted him, echoing in the stillness of the night. Lost in his thoughts, he didn't notice the figure approaching until he heard the soft sound of footsteps on the gravel path. He looked up to find Sarah standing a few feet away, her eyes fixed on the grave. Emma was clinging to her side, her small frame shivering slightly in the cool air. "Are you okay?" Sarah asked, her voice gentle yet filled with concern. James wiped his eyes, surprised to see her here. "I didn't expect to see you again," he admitted, his heart racing. "This is my past." "Elizabeth?" Sarah said quietly, stepping closer. She glanced down at the grave, recognition dawning in her eyes. "I didn't know. I'm sorry." James nodded, his throat tight. She is, someone I loved deeply. I've been searching for answers for so long." He paused, taking a deep breath. "And now, I'm left with questions that may never be answered." Sarah's gaze softened, and for a moment, they shared a silence that spoke volumes. Then, to his surprise, she knelt beside him, her eyes brimming with emotion. "I understand loss," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I've lost so much in my life." But before he could respond, Emma tugged at her mother's sleeve, her innocent voice breaking the tension. "Mommy, who is he? Why are we here?" James couldn't help but smile at the child's curiosity. "I'm just a friend," he said, his tone lightening. "A friend of your mom's." Sarah looked at him, her expression a mix of surprise and something else. Recognition? "You've helped us today," she said softly, glancing back at Elizabeth's grave. I think maybe you were meant to be here." As they shared a moment of understanding, James felt a flicker of something he hadn't felt in years: hope. Perhaps this encounter was more than mere coincidence. Perhaps it was a chance to uncover the truth he had been searching for all this time. But just as he was about to voice his thoughts, a flicker of recognition crossed Sarah's face, as if something primal had clicked into place. She looked at him with wide eyes, a hint of fear mingling with the recognition. Do you know Elizabeth?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. James's heart raced. "I loved her," he admitted, "but she disappeared. No one knows what happened." The air between them crackled with unspoken words, a tension that hinted at deeper connections yet to be explored. James felt as if he were on the brink of a revelation, a turning point that could change everything he thought he knew. As the moon hung high in the night sky, casting a silver glow over the cemetery, he sensed that this encounter with Sarah and Emma was just the beginning of a journey that would unravel buried secrets and confront the shadows of his past. The questions that had haunted him for years were finally beginning to surface, and he couldn't shake the feeling that he was closer to the truth than he had ever been before. James stood in stunned silence as the revelation settled over him like a heavy fog. Sarah's words echoed in his mind, intertwining with memories of a past he thought he'd long buried. Elizabeth, his Elizabeth, was Sarah's older sister. The connection sent a ripple of emotions through him: confusion, anger, sorrow, and an overwhelming sense of longing. "Are you saying Elizabeth is your sister?" he finally managed to ask, his voice barely above a whisper. He felt the weight of the moment pressing down on them, the grief of lost years hanging in the air. Sarah nodded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Yes, she was my sister. After everything happened, our family fell apart. I lost her, and then I lost everything else." Her voice quivered, and she hugged Emma closer, as if to shield her from the pain of the past. James swallowed hard, trying to process the implications of what Sarah had just revealed. What happened to her? Why did she disappear? He needed answers, not just for himself, but for the little girl beside her, the child he suspected might be his own. Sarah took a deep breath, her gaze drifting to the grave of Elizabeth that lay before them. It was a tragic incident, one that changed our lives forever. Elizabeth was trying to protect us. She thought if she changed her name and disappeared, it would keep us safe. There were threats, James. Threats to our family that she believed were real. James felt a chill run down his spine. He had long suspected that Elizabeth's disappearance was tied to something sinister, but hearing it confirmed left him feeling hollow. And you? How did you end up here, homeless with Emma? He gestured to the surroundings that had become their life, filled with hardship and despair. A shadow passed over Sarah's face, and she looked down at the ground. After Elizabeth vanished, our family fell apart. My parents couldn't handle the loss. They turned to alcohol, to anger, anything to escape the pain. I was left to fend for myself, and when I became pregnant with Emma, things only got harder. She paused, wiping a tear from her cheek. I tried to reach out, but everyone had moved on. I lost my support system. I've been alone for so long. James's heart ached at her words. He could see the struggle etched on her face, the burden she carried like a heavy cloak. But you fought for her. You raised Emma alone, he said, admiration seeping into his voice. Every day, she replied, her eyes fierce with determination. She's my world, James. I would do anything for her. James looked at Emma, who was quietly listening, her big brown eyes filled with innocence and curiosity. And she deserves better than this, he said, his voice firm. You both do. I want to help. Sarah's gaze flickered with uncertainty. Help us? But why? You don't even know me, and I'm just a nobody, she said, her voice trembling with vulnerability. James stepped closer, his expression earnest. You're not a nobody. You're Elizabeth's sister, and that makes you important to me. I need to understand what happened to her, and if there's a chance that Emma is my daughter, I want to do right by both of you. The air grew thick with tension as Sarah processed his words. You think Emma is? She began, but the thought seemed to overwhelm her. I need to know, James replied, his tone gentle yet insistent. I need to know if there's a chance. If Elizabeth had a child, if that child is mine, then I want to be in both of your lives. I want to protect you. Sarah's eyes widened, a flicker of hope igniting within them. You really mean that? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Yes, he affirmed, taking a step back to give her space, but not breaking eye contact. I can't change the past, but I want to be here for you. I want to help you get back on your feet, to give Emma the life she deserves. For a moment, silence enveloped them, the weight of their circumstances hanging heavy in the air. Sarah looked away, her gaze drifting back to Elizabeth's grave, and James could see the internal battle she was fighting. I don't know if I can trust you, she finally said, her voice a mixture of hope and skepticism. What if you're just saying these things? What if you leave like everyone else? James felt a pang of frustration at her hesitance, but he understood. Trust was a fragile thing, particularly for someone who had weathered as much as Sarah had. I promise you, I'm not going anywhere. I know what it's like to feel alone, to feel lost. You've shown incredible strength to get this far. I want to stand by you and Emma. Please, let me help. Tears spilled down Sarah's cheeks, and she quickly wiped them away. But James had already seen her vulnerability. Okay, she said softly, her voice cracking. I'll let you help us, but you need to know that it won't be easy. I don't expect it to be, he replied, his heart racing with a mix of hope and anxiety. We'll take it one step at a time. As Sarah reached into her backpack, James felt a surge of anticipation. What could she possibly show him next? She pulled out a worn envelope, its edges frayed and yellowed with age. This is a letter Elizabeth wrote before she disappeared, she said, her voice trembling. James's heart raced as she handed it to him. The envelope felt heavy in his hands, and he could see Elizabeth's elegant handwriting scrawled across the front. She wanted me to take care of you and her child, Sarah explained, her voice breaking. I never knew how to give you this, but I always kept it safe. He carefully opened the envelope, feeling a rush of emotions wash over him as he unfolded the letter. The words were like echoes from the past, each stroke of her pen a reminder of the love they had shared. James, he read aloud, his voice thick with emotion. If you're reading this, it means I'm not there with you. I need you to know that I love you, and that I'm sorry for everything. Please take care of yourself, and if you can, I need you to promise me that you'll look after my child. I don't know what's coming, but I know I must protect my family. I love you. He paused, the weight of her words enveloping him, and his heart raced as he realized the implications of the letter. This means Emma could really be— Yes, Sarah whispered, her own voice breaking. "I never told anyone. I didn't know how to tell you, and I didn't know if you'd want to know. But if Elizabeth was trying to protect us, then she must have known something terrible was coming." James's mind raced as he processed the new reality. The pieces were falling into place, but with them, the enormity of the situation loomed larger. He had to find out the truth. "We need to find out what happened to her. We need to figure this out together," he said, determination flooding his veins. Sarah nodded, her expression shifting from fear to resolve. "Together," she echoed, her voice steadying. "But if we're going to do this, we need to be careful. There are people who might not want us to find out the truth." "I'll protect you," James vowed, the resolve in his voice unwavering. "You and Emma are my priority now. We'll face whatever comes together." As they stood before Elizabeth's grave, the weight of the past shifted, replaced by a fragile sense of hope. The journey ahead would be fraught with challenges, but for the first time in years, James felt the stirrings of a connection that could lead to redemption, not just for him, but for Sarah and Emma as well. Together, they would uncover the truth, and perhaps, in doing so, they would find a way to heal the wounds of the past. James Bennet sat in the small diner, the hum of conversation and clinking of silverware, a stark contrast to the whirlwind of thoughts racing through his mind. The space was warm, the scent of freshly brewed coffee permeating the air, but he felt a chill draft of uncertainty. Across from him, Sarah stirred her lukewarm cup of coffee, her eyes darting around the room, betraying her unease. Emma, oblivious to the tension, colored quietly in a sketchbook, her small hands moving with a focus that captivated James. "Sarah," he began, his voice steady but laced with concern, "I want to help you and Emma. I know things are complicated right now, but I can't turn my back on what we discovered today." She looked up, her brow furrowing as she considered his words. "You don't know what you're getting into, James. My life. It's not what you think. I don't want to drag you into my problems." There was a tremor in her voice, a mix of fear and hesitation. James leaned forward, drawing her attention. "But what if Emma is my daughter? I need to know the truth, Sarah. Not just for my sake, but for hers as well. She deserves to know who her father is." Sarah's eyes softened momentarily, but the weight of her past pressed heavily on her. "You say you want to help, but what if I'm just a burden? I've been on my own for so long. I don't want to hurt you any more than I already have." "By being here, you're not hurting me," he replied earnestly. "You're giving me a chance to be part of something meaningful again. I lost Elizabeth, and now I have a chance to reconnect with my past through you and Emma." The mention of Elizabeth caused a flicker of pain to cross Sarah's face. Elizabeth was always the strong one. She was the one who protected me, who took care of everything. When she disappeared, it shattered our family. Her voice trembled as she spoke, revealing a chink in her armor. "I don't want to lose that strength again." James reached across the table, his hand gently resting over hers. "You're not going to lose me. I promise. We can face this together." For a moment, Sarah's defenses wavered, and she searched his gaze for sincerity. "What do you want from me, James? Really?" "I want to understand," he said softly. "I want to understand what happened to Elizabeth, and if there's a chance for us to be a family, I want to take it. But I can't do it alone." Her breath caught in her throat as she looked down at their joined hands. The warmth of his touch sent a flicker of hope through her, but doubt quickly crept back in. "I don't know if I can accept your help. It feels too risky. You don't know who's out there, watching us." James felt a knot tighten in his stomach at her words. He had sensed something ominous ever since he first saw that shadowy figure lurking outside the diner. "What do you mean? Is someone following you?" "Since Elizabeth disappeared, I've had to look over my shoulder constantly. I never know if someone is going to come after me or Emma." Sarah's voice was barely above a whisper, laden with the weight of her fears. "I can't let that happen." James's heart raced as he considered the implications of her words. What kind of danger are we talking about? Is it related to Elizabeth's past? "Maybe," Sarah replied, her eyes darting to the window. "After she left, things got messy. There were people looking for her, people who didn't want her to be found. I think they're still out there." A A tense silence filled the space as James absorbed the gravity of her statement. They were not just dealing with family secrets. They were entangled in something much darker. "We have to be careful then," he said finally, his voice low and determined. "But I won't let fear dictate our lives. I want to protect you both." Sarah nodded slowly, the resolve in his tone igniting something deep within her. "If you're really serious about this, we can try. But you have to promise me that you'll stay safe. If they find out who you are, I can handle myself," he interrupted, a hint of steel in his voice. "I'm not afraid of a few shadows." As they finished their meal, an unexpected warmth began to blossom between them, a fragile connection tethered by shared pain and an emerging hope. James watched Emma as she carefully colored, her little brows furrowed in concentration, her innocence a stark reminder of what was at stake. He couldn't shake the feeling that, somehow, their lives were intertwined in ways he had yet to understand. "Let's take it one step at a time," James suggested as they rose from the table. "We can start by finding a safe place for you and Emma. You shouldn't have to worry about your safety while we figure everything out." Sarah gave a small, hesitant smile, the first glimmer of trust breaking through her walls. "Okay, I'll consider it. Just, can we keep this between us for now? I don't want to draw attention." "Of course," he assured her. "Whatever it takes to keep you both safe." As they stepped outside, the evening air wrapped around them like a shroud. The sun dipped low on the horizon, casting an amber glow over the street. But as James turned to lead them to his car, he noticed the shadowy figure that had been watching them from across the street. The figure lingered in the distance, obscured by the gathering twilight, but James felt a chill wash over him. "Sarah," he said, his voice low, "do you see that?" "What?" she asked, her eyes scanning the area. "That man over there," James pointed discreetly. "He's been watching us." Her expression shifted from cautious hope to stark fear. "We need to go. Now." James nodded, adrenaline surging through him as he ushered them toward his car. The figure seemed to shift, almost as if sensing their urgency, but James couldn't afford to dwell on it. The safety of Sarah and Emma was paramount. As they climbed into the car, James's mind raced with possibilities. Who was that man? What did he want? Could he be connected to Elizabeth's past? He glanced at Sarah, who was now visibly shaken, her eyes darting nervously between the rearview mirror and the street behind them. "Are you all right?" he asked, the concern evident in his voice. "I don't know, James. I can't shake this feeling that we're being hunted," she replied, her voice trembling slightly. "We'll figure this out," he promised, gripping the steering wheel tightly as he pulled away from the curb. "You're not alone in this anymore. I won't let anything happen to you or Emma." As they drove into the night, the weight of uncertainty loomed large. James's mind buzzed with questions, but one thing was clear. They were stepping into a dangerous game, and he was determined to protect his newfound family, no matter the cost. The roads ahead were shrouded in darkness, but he could feel a flicker of resolve igniting within him, a sense of purpose that he hadn't felt in years. They would uncover the truth, together. James Bennett sat at his polished mahogany desk, the soft glow of the desk lamp illuminating the scattered papers before him. He had spent the better part of the afternoon poring over Elizabeth's past, flipping through old newspaper clippings and notes he had taken during his brief search for her years ago. Each article was a painful reminder of the love he had lost, the unanswered questions that lingered like a bitter aftertaste. He couldn't shake the feeling that the truth was just beyond his reach, waiting to be uncovered. The private investigator he had hired, a grizzled man named Tom, was due to arrive any moment. Tom had a reputation for digging deep, and James hoped he would be able to unearth the secrets surrounding Elizabeth's disappearance. The clock ticked loudly in the silence of the room, each second amplifying his anxiety. He picked up his phone, glancing at the screen, half expecting a message from Sarah or Emma. They had become a significant part of his life in a very short time, and the thought of them filled him with both hope and confusion. As if on cue, a knock at the door broke his reverie. "Come in," he called out, straightening his posture. Tom entered, a wiry man with salt and pepper hair and sharp blue eyes that seemed to miss nothing. He closed the door behind him and took a seat across from James. "You look like you've seen a ghost, Bennett," he said with a half-smirk, but his tone quickly shifted to seriousness. I assume you've gathered the pieces of this puzzle? James leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. I need to know everything about Elizabeth's life before she disappeared. Her friends, her enemies, anyone who might have had a reason to hurt her. Tom nodded, pulling out a folder from his briefcase. I've started digging into her past. It's not pretty, but I found some leads. He laid the folder on the desk, opening it to reveal a series of photographs and documents. She had a few close friends, but I also came across some unsettling connections. People she was involved with, some of them don't have the best reputations. James felt a chill run down his spine as he scanned the photos. Each face seemed to tell a story, a warning perhaps. What do you mean by unsettling connections? Tom tapped a photo of a man with a chiseled jaw and dark hair. This guy, Mark Delaney, was known for his aggressive business tactics. He and Elizabeth were involved in a charity project together, but there are whispers that it was more than just a professional relationship. Some say he was obsessed with her. James clenched his jaw, anger rising within him. Did he have anything to do with her disappearance? That's what I intend to find out, Tom replied, his tone measured. I'll dig into Delaney's background and see if there's any connection to Elizabeth's last known whereabouts. But I must warn you, this could get messy. James leaned back in his chair, the weight of the investigation pressing down on him like a dark cloud. He thought of Sarah and Emma, how they had become anchors in his tumultuous sea of emotions. Would uncovering Elizabeth's truth put them in danger? Meanwhile, at a small, run-down apartment on the outskirts of the city, Sarah sat on a tattered couch, her eyes fixed on the wall. Emma was playing in the corner, building a tower of blocks. The warmth of the sun streaming through the grimy window felt like a fleeting comfort amidst her growing fears. Sarah's mind was clouded with doubt. Ever since James had entered their lives, she had felt a flicker of hope, a feeling she hadn't experienced in years. But with that hope came the gnawing fear that she was unworthy of such kindness. What if he changed his mind? What if he realized she was just a homeless woman with a troubled past? "Mommy, look!" Emma exclaimed, her voice bright and innocent as she held up her tower, which had just toppled over. Sarah forced a smile, but inside, she felt the walls closing in. "Good job, sweetheart," she replied, forcing enthusiasm into her voice. "You're building a skyscraper." Emma giggled, her laughter a sweet melody that momentarily eased Sarah's anxiety. But as Emma returned to her blocks, Sarah's thoughts spiraled. James was a successful restaurateur, a man with the world at his feet. What did he see in her? Did he truly want to be part of their lives, or was she simply a charity case in his eyes? Later that evening, Sarah found herself pacing the tiny living room, her heart racing. She picked up her phone, staring at it as if it would provide answers. Should she call James? Would he understand her fears? But the thought of burdening him with her insecurities made her hesitate. Just then, her phone buzzed. It was a message from James. "Hey, Sarah. I just wanted to check in. I hope you and Emma are doing okay." Her heart swelled at his words, but the tumult of her emotions surged again. She typed a response but deleted it before she hit send. What could she say? That she was terrified of being left behind again? That she felt like an imposter in his world? Instead, she settled on a simple reply. "We're fine. Emma is playing. How about you?" As she sent the message, she felt a pang of longing. She wanted to trust James, to believe that he genuinely cared. But the scars of her past loomed large, a constant reminder of the pain she had endured. A few moments later, her phone buzzed again. "Good to hear. I'm just working on some things. Let's get together soon. I'd love to take you both out for dinner." Sarah's heart fluttered at the invitation, but doubt crept in. What if he only wanted to help out of pity? She couldn't bear the thought of him feeling obligated. "Sounds great, James," she replied, forcing a smile even though he couldn't see her. "Let me check with Emma, and I'll get back to you." As she set her phone down, a shadow flickered outside the window, catching her attention. Her heart raced as she glanced outside, her pulse quickening. It was probably just a trick of the light, she told herself, but the feeling of being watched sent a chill through her. Later that night, as Emma fell asleep, Sarah curled up on the couch, her thoughts racing. She wished she could shake the feeling of unease that had settled in the pit of her stomach. Was someone really watching them? The next day, James met Sarah at a small park, where the sun shone brightly, illuminating their surroundings. He spotted her sitting on a bench, Emma playing on the swings. The sight of them together filled him with warmth, but he also sensed the tension radiating from Sarah. "Hey there," he greeted, his voice cheerful as he approached them. Emma ran over, her face lighting up. "James, look at me swing." James chuckled, kneeling down to her level. "That's amazing, Emma. You're going so high." As he engaged with Emma, he felt Sarah's gaze linger on him, filled with unsaid words and hidden fears. After a few moments, he turned to her, sensing something was off. "Is everything okay, Sarah?" She hesitated, biting her lip as she searched for the right words. I think I'm not what you expect," she finally confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. "You have this incredible life, and I'm just me." James's heart sank at her words. He reached out, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "That's not true. You and Emma are incredible. I want to be part of your lives, and it's not out of pity. It's because I care." Her eyes glistened with unshed tears, and for a moment, James thought she might break down. But instead, she looked away, shaking her head. "You don't know me, James. You don't know what I've been through. What if I drag you down?" "Listen to me," he said, his voice firm yet gentle. "I'm not going anywhere. I want to help you. I want to know you. You're not a burden to me." But just as he thought they were making progress, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out and glanced at the screen. His expression shifted from warmth to dread as he read the message. "Stay away from her and the girl. You don't know what you're getting into." He looked up, his heart racing. "Sarah, we have to talk." Before he could finish, Sarah's eyes widened in fear. "What's wrong?" James felt an overwhelming sense of urgency. "I just received a message. It's threatening. We need to be careful." With that, the cloud of uncertainty descended upon them, darkening the moment they had begun to share. James realized that their journey was only beginning, and the shadows of the past were far from over. James Bennett felt a surge of determination as he sat in his sleek office, the city skyline sprawling out beneath him like a shimmering ocean of opportunity. His luxurious surroundings offered no comfort as the weight of the revelations from the past few days pressed down on him. Sarah's story, a tapestry woven with pain, loss, and an unexpected thread of hope, echoed in his mind. The realization that Emma might be his daughter, a child he never knew existed, fueled his resolve to uncover the truth behind Elizabeth's disappearance. He reached for his phone, dialing the private investigator he'd hired, a grizzled veteran named Max. The phone rang twice before Max's gravelly voice answered. "James, what do you need?" "Max, I need every piece of information you can dig up on a man named Richard Caldwell," James said, his voice steady but laced with urgency. "He's tied to Elizabeth's past, and I have a feeling he knows more than he's letting on." "Caldwell? The real estate mogul?" "He's a slippery one," Max replied, his tone shifting to one of caution. "I'll see what I can find, but if he's involved with Elizabeth, this could get messy." "Messy is exactly what I'm prepared for," James said, the fire of determination igniting within him. He hung up, taking a moment to gather his thoughts. He needed to protect Sarah and Emma, and it was clear that the shadows of the past were closing in on them. As he prepared to leave his office, a sudden chill swept through him. He had seen that shadowy figure watching them before, lingering at the edges of his vision. It was a reminder that danger lurked just outside the comforting glow of his success. He grabbed his coat and headed out, determined to shield Sarah and Emma from whatever threats lay ahead. Meanwhile, Sarah sat in the small, dimly lit room she shared with Emma in the homeless shelter. The walls were painted a dull gray, and the atmosphere felt heavy with despair. Emma was asleep on the cot beside her, clutching a tattered stuffed bear that had seen better days. Sarah's heart ached as she looked at her daughter, the light of her life in a world filled with shadows. Just then, the door creaked open, and the same shadowy figure that had been stalking them entered the room. Sarah's heart raced. She recognized him as the man who had been watching her and James at the diner. He was tall and imposing, with a hardened face that seemed to belong to another time. He stepped forward, a menacing glint in his eye. "Sarah," he said, his voice low and threatening, "you need to stay away from James Bennett. He's not who you think he is." "What do you want?" Sarah demanded, her voice shaking but filled with defiance. She stood protectively in front of Emma's cot, ready to shield her daughter from the threat. The man chuckled darkly. "You think you can protect her? You have no idea what you're dealing with. Bennett is in over his head, and you're dragging him down with you. I have connections, and I can make your life very difficult if you don't listen. Why are you doing this?" Sarah pressed, her heart pounding. "What do you have against him?" "Bennett has ties to people you wouldn't want to mess with," the man replied, his tone icy. "And if you continue to associate with him, you and that little girl will suffer the consequences. I suggest you take my warning seriously." Before Sarah could respond, he turned and walked out, leaving her trembling. The weight of his threat hung in the air like a storm cloud, and she felt a wave of helplessness wash over her. How could she protect Emma from this? How could she protect herself? When James arrived at the shelter, he found Sarah sitting outside, her face pale and her hands trembling. He rushed to her side, concern etched across his features. "Sarah, what happened? Are you okay?" She looked up at him, her eyes wide with fear. "James," he came back, "the man who's been watching us. He threatened me. He said I needed to stay away from you." James clenched his fists, fury boiling inside him. "Who is he? What did he say?" "He didn't give me his name," Sarah replied, her voice shaking. "But he said you're in danger because of me, that I'm dragging you down. He has connections, dangerous ones." James felt a wave of protectiveness wash over him. "No one is going to hurt you or Emma. I promise I'll do everything I can to keep you both safe." "But how?" Sarah asked, tears glistening in her eyes. "I can't let anything happen to Emma. She's my whole world." James took a deep breath, trying to quell the rising panic. "We need to confront this together. We can't let fear dictate our lives. I'll find out who this man is and what he wants. But first, we need to get somewhere safe." Sarah nodded, her resolve strengthening. "You're right. I can't keep running. I need to face this for Emma's sake." "Good," James said, his voice steady. "We'll figure this out together. We'll confront the past, no matter how dark it may be." As they spoke, a sense of solidarity began to form between them, a bond forged in the fires of fear and uncertainty. James reached out, taking Sarah's hand in his, grounding her in the moment. "I won't let you go through this alone," he vowed. "We'll face whatever comes our way together." Sarah looked into his eyes, searching for reassurance, and found it there. "Thank you, James. I don't know what I'd do without you." He squeezed her hand, a silent promise of protection. "We'll get through this, I swear it. But we need to act fast. If this man is tied to Caldwell, we're running out of time." Sarah took a deep breath, steeling herself. "Let's do it then. Let's uncover the truth, no matter what it takes." As they stood together, a newfound strength coursing through them, the shadows of the past loomed ominously. But for the first time in a long time, they felt a flicker of hope. Together, they were ready to confront the darkness and fight for the future they both desperately desired. James took a deep breath as he and Sarah approached the imposing building that housed the powerful man they were about to confront. The weight of the past hung heavily on their shoulders, a tangible presence that threatened to crush them beneath its burden. Sarah walked beside him, her hand nervously clutching Emma's as they navigated the sleek marble lobby. The glittering chandeliers above seemed to mock their plight, illuminating their anxious faces with a cold, sterile light. "Are you sure about this?" Sarah whispered, her voice trembling slightly. Her eyes darted around, scanning the polished surfaces for any sign of danger. "I have to be," James replied, his voice steady despite the turmoil swirling within him. "We need answers, and he's the only one who can provide them." They stepped into the elevator, the doors sliding shut with a finality that echoed James's growing sense of urgency. He pressed the button for the top floor, where the man awaited them. As the elevator ascended, he glanced at Sarah, feeling the weight of her uncertainty. She was a warrior, battling the demons of her past, yet he could see the flicker of fear in her eyes. "Remember, we're in this together," James said, offering a reassuring smile. "No matter what happens, I won't let anything happen to you or Emma." Sarah nodded, though the apprehension in her gaze remained. Emma, sensing the tension, clung to her mother, her small frame trembling slightly. James felt a surge of protectiveness wash over him. This little girl, who might be his daughter, deserved a life free from fear and uncertainty. As the elevator doors opened, they stepped into a lavish office adorned with expensive art and a sweeping view of the city. The man they were confronting, Vincent Caldwell, sat behind a massive mahogany desk, his demeanor calm and collected, as if he were merely waiting for a meeting rather than facing the ghosts of his past. "James Bennett," he said, a sardonic smile creeping onto his lips. "I've been expecting you." "Cut the pleasantries, Caldwell," James replied, his voice firm. "We know what you did to Elizabeth. It's time you tell us the truth." Vincent leaned back in his chair, his expression shifting from amusement to annoyance. "And what truth would that be? That she vanished? Or that I had something to do with it?" "Both," Sarah interjected, her voice rising with emotion. "You made her disappear to protect your interests. You've kept secrets that have torn our family apart." Vincent's gaze flickered to Emma, who stood behind Sarah, her innocent eyes wide with confusion. "I see you've brought the child," he said, his tone dripping with condescension. "You think that will sway me?" James stepped forward, feeling the heat of anger rising in his chest. "This isn't a game, Caldwell. You've destroyed lives, and now you're going to take responsibility." With a deep sigh, Vincent leaned forward, his fingers steepled before him. "What if I told you that it wasn't as simple as that?" he said, his voice lowering to a conspiratorial whisper. "What if I told you that I was never the one in control?" James frowned, confusion mingling with frustration. "What are you talking about?" "Elizabeth had to disappear," Vincent continued, a hint of desperation creeping into his voice. "She was in danger, not just from me, but from forces far beyond my reach. She escaped to protect her child." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. "You're lying," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "You don't get to absolve yourself of this. You were a part of it." "I was coerced," Vincent replied, his expression shifting to one of genuine regret. "I didn't want to be involved in this, but I had no choice. They threatened me, my family. Elizabeth knew it, and made the decision to keep Emma safe." James felt a sense of disbelief wash over him. "And what about the evidence? You still haven't explained how you know Emma is my daughter." Vincent reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a manila envelope, sliding it across the desk toward them. "I kept this hidden for years, hoping that the truth would never come to light. Inside is proof of her lineage, documents that connect Emma to you, James." James's heart raced as he opened the envelope, his hands trembling slightly. He pulled out the birth certificate, the name, Emma Bennett, printed clearly across the top. The implications crashed over him like a tidal wave. This little girl, this innocent child who had captured his heart, was his flesh and blood. "Is this true?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper, a mix of hope and skepticism in her eyes. "Can she really be?" James nodded, overwhelmed by the revelation. "It's true. Emma is my daughter." Tears brimmed in Sarah's eyes, and she turned to Emma, who was blissfully unaware of the weight of their conversation. James stepped closer, kneeling down to meet her gaze. "Emma," he said gently, "you're very special. You know that?" Emma looked up at him, her head cocked to one side. "Why?" "Because you have a family who loves you very much," he replied, his heart swelling with affection. "And I promise to always take care of you." Vincent watched the exchange, a flicker of something akin to remorse passing across his face. "This doesn't change what happened, James. Elizabeth's disappearance, my involvement, it's all still a part of your story." "I don't care about the past anymore," James said, rising to his full height, determination etched into every feature. "What matters is the future. I will protect Sarah and Emma, no matter what it takes." Vincent leaned back, seemingly resigned. "Then you'll have to be cautious. There are still people who don't want this truth out." They'll do anything to keep it buried. Let them come, James replied, his voice resolute. I won't let fear dictate our lives any longer. We will face them together. With the confrontation reaching its climax, James turned to Sarah, who was looking at him with a mixture of gratitude and newfound strength. He reached for her hand, intertwining their fingers. Are you ready? He asked, his gaze steady. I am, she replied, her voice firm, and as they embraced, a warmth enveloped them, a promise of protection and love. Together, they walked out of the office, leaving behind the shadows of the past. As they stepped into the sunlight, James felt a renewed sense of hope coursing through him. With Sarah and Emma by his side, he was ready to build a future free from the darkness that had haunted them for too long. The world outside seemed brighter, filled with possibilities. They were on the precipice of a new beginning, one where they would reclaim their lives and forge a bond that could never be broken. James knew that the journey ahead would not be easy, but with his newfound family, he was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Together, they would confront the shadows of their past and emerge stronger, united in their love and determination. If you enjoyed this heartwarming story about overcoming challenges and family love, don't forget to like the video, comment on what touched you the most, and subscribe to the channel. Stay tuned for our next exciting story.